Welcome to Durham Cathedral's online Quiet Day. My name is Ruth Hake. I'm an RAF chaplain, and many years ago I was also a graduate of Durham University, where I spent 3 extremely happy years living across the way in Durham Castle and reading history. Durham has itself seen quite a bit of history and lends itself to the topic of the Quiet Day today, remembrance and transformation. The walls of the cathedral, of the castle and of the town have seen hundreds of years of events, of people, of profound thought and faith, of war, of prisoners, of oppression, of freedom, and of the weather. Remembering is evocatively easy in a place of such history. And yet the transformations it will have seen in those times as well is hard to comprehend. I remember being in Durham Cathedral sometime in early October 1996. I was dressed in an undergraduate gown and I remember saying some words and there was an odd ceremony, and then we all traipsed back out and over to Castle with some music playing. We had matriculated. It was, I have to say, all a bit of a mystery to my 18-year-old self, and yet I found myself proud, included, part of something. I was now a member of the university. What does it mean to be a member of something? A member of a church, of a university, a member of a family, maybe a football club or a tapestry group or a choir, a member of an ethnic group or a tribe. What is it about? Some memberships are, I'm sure you would agree, profound. They are fundamental to identity, to our purpose and to our calling. Some of those memberships are transformational, and these we often imbue with vows and promises and ceremonies. Some are a little less serious. My membership of the gin club is almost entirely transactional. I wonder for you, what are you a member of? What memberships are transformational for you? Which ones are fundamental to your identity? Which could we leave without a second thought? Which would we sacrifice everything to maintain? At heart, whatever groups or families or tribes we're members of, we are all members of the human race. We are all bound together in our humanity, and there is something about being human that needs membership. We need to belong. We need to matter to others. We matter to our families, maybe to our friends, to our colleagues, to our loved ones, to our church, and to God. And we've all borne witness in the last few weeks to the unbearable suffering which comes from being ripped apart from loved ones. That comes from the evil, unspeakable savagery that denies humanity and takes away that membership of the human race. And it's been very hard to hear these stories. It's been devastating to see humanity stripped away, because we do recognise that humanity and we have empathy. But yet, however much I've wanted to turn away and protect myself from knowing what is happening to people, I firmly believe that it is important to bear witness and to know the truth. Because remembering is so much more than a simple recall of events. Remembering in this context is a powerful action that gives back that humanity, that membership of the human race to people who have had it ripped from them. Remembering is important because it cements us as being part of a group, a family, a community. Remembrance and remembering is important, both individually and collectively. It tells us who we are and where we've come from, and it links us into our community, our friends, and our family. How important is it to know this in these times of all times? Incidentally, this is one of the reasons why memory loss can be so distressing, and why we should work hard to help those who suffer from memory loss to link to their community and their friends. The events of the First World War, the trenches, the loss of life were dramatic and often traumatic. They affected pretty much every community in this country. And while many individuals didn't talk about it for many years, collectively, the nation needed to remember. The trauma and loss of life that our nation suffered was so significant that remembering became vital. Not simply a memory of events, a list of battles fought, but a remembering of people, of lives, of feelings, of relationships. The millions lost cemented it on the nation's psyche, a collective remembering. But for each parent, child, brother, sister, wife, and husband, it was a personal remembering as well. The nation, the community, the family, all stopping for 2 minutes every year to say that the individual was important to remember. The contrast between the millions who died and the personal grief, literally embodied in the tomb of the unknown soldier. A national act of remembrance which had an immediate personal context for nearly everyone in the country. Remembering not simply a memory, but mentally and emotionally placing oneself back into a moment for 2 minutes each year, because those who died had value. They had innate worth as individuals. For all it's the overwhelming numbers we recall in the history books, it's the individuals who are grieved over. So why do we remember now, 105 years on from the end of the First World War? Why do we still fall silent? I think it's because it's still part of our story. A few years ago, I was lucky enough to go down into the moat in the Tower of London and see that sea of poppies that had been placed there. I listened to the conversations of the many people who were there to see them. Many, perhaps most, were there remembering a specific family member. A family member who had died 100 years previously. And yet, a family member they needed to remember. A family member of whom they have no memory. And yet, remembering is still important. 100 years later, and a great niece or a great-great-grandson were there moved to tears, talking about them and their loss. A treasured moment, not because they held a memory, but because that individual mattered within their family remembrance. It was through the remembering that the generations belonged to one another and their stories interwove and continued to matter. The Bible talks very clearly about the worth of each individual and about our worth as a nation and as a group. Remembering is important to both these things. When things are as bad as they can get, and we are living through a period of time where things can seem to be as bad as they can get in lots of directions, it is possible to understand how we can feel that God has forgotten us, that we've been abandoned. Even Jesus on the cross during his crucifixion shouted out, my God, why have you forsaken me?" And this cry from the heart almost certainly found echo in the trenches of the First World War. And I would think has found an echo in many hearts over the last few weeks. there is a reading from Isaiah which speaks into this space. Can a mother forget the baby at her breast and have no compassion on the child she has borne? Though she may forget, I will not forget you. See, I have engraved you on the palms of my hands. Can a mother forget the baby at her breast? Even if she could, the vanishingly unlikely possibility that a mother could forget her own baby, so much more will God remember us. So much more are we cared about. So much more valuable are we to God. He remembers us. In the midst of desolation, in the midst of forsakenness, the isolation of feeling utterly alone and forgotten, it is the being remembered that gives us our humanity back. It demonstrates our innate worth. And the evidence for this is given by God. He has engraved you on the palms of his hands. A reference Christians would say to the wounds of Jesus on the cross. He has not forgotten us. He is prepared to die for us. And so, if it is the remembering which hands us back our humanity, it is the sacrifice which demands our attention and our respect. There is a phrase from the New Testament which is encapsulated on many a war memorial. Greater love hath no man than this, that he lay down his life for his friends. So far from having forgotten us, Jesus laid down his life for us. And so also many millions of our forebears have laid down their lives for us and for our future. And so we remember. And yet, we're all aware that the sacrifice demanded by the Great War, that war to end all wars, was not the end of the story. And many of us will know people who have sacrificed much in the Second World War. Indeed, only a couple of years ago, I was privileged to rededicate the graves of 6 airmen missing since 1940, having just identified their graves in a small French town, their bodies having been hidden by the French resistance until after the war. One 76-year-old man I was with had been 3 weeks old when his father went missing and had lived his entire life not knowing what had happened to his father. No personal memory, and yet exuding the importance of remembering and keeping alive a story within a family. For the first time, he was able to lay flowers at his father's grave. He was able to hold a service for him and mourn him, knowing what had happened to him. Hugely emotional and hugely important. Remembering is a human action which gives value. God tells us that remembering is a divine action which gives value to humanity. We live in times where the reality of war in Europe has returned, where our neighbours and our friends may be refugees from war, where my colleagues are daily working to protect us all from a very real threat, at great risk to themselves. The National Act of Remembrance still has an immediate personal context for many, and myself included. Just over 14 years ago, at midnight on a freezing runway in southern Afghanistan, I said the words we repeat at Remembrance. They shall grow not old as we that are left grow old. Age shall not weary them, nor the years condemn. At the going down of the sun and in the morning, we will remember them. The young man who I'd helped put in his coffin an hour or so earlier was being gently placed in a C-17 ready to be flown home. He would not grow old, as I hope to grow old. His name, his face, and those of many others of my friends and colleagues are the names and faces I remember each Remembrance Day. And there was a sudden realisation for me on that day, at that moment, that this act of remembrance was no longer for me about the very old men I'd seen as a child at the War Memorial, with no understanding really that they could ever have been young, and not really comprehending what it was all about. It was now personal. I am the one now left to grow old. And as we grow older, we live in a nation where huge sacrifices have been made by previous generations, and indeed by our own generation, in order to protect us and give us freedom, where huge sacrifices are still required from those who protect us and maintain that freedom. So remembrance is our opportunity to remember personally, to grieve personally, but also to remember collectively. Being remembered, knowing we are remembered, gives us back our humanity in the worst of circumstances. God tells us that we matter to him even more than a baby does to its mother. That remembering us is a divine action which gives value to humanity. He is prepared to sacrifice himself for us. Today we remember those who've also followed that command, that greater love hath no one than this, that they lay down their life for their friends, knowing that those friends, us, will remember them and their innate worth as a human being, both to us and to God.